It's good morning, Tracy Ryan. Welcome to Yellow Shelf.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Oh, Tracy, it's so good to have you here. I've got a copy of your book, The War Within Me. Congratulations, your book's out now. Tell us all about
It
this
is.
book, which is the second book in a trilogy series.
It is, but in fact, you can read it as a standalone. So if anybody hasn't read the first one, which I've got here, is called The Queen's Apprenticeship. So
Yes.
that's the first one in the trilogy. You can still read this second one without having to read the first one. It's historical fiction. So it's based on history, but with a lot of imagination thrown in. And the connection between the two books is that the first Queen of Navarre I wrote about was Marguerite, and her daughter, Jeanne, is the central character of the second novel. So it's kind of a mother-daughter link between the two books.
Yeah. And Tracy, you're a seasoned author in poetry as well as novels. You've got this really lengthy career. Tell us about what inspired you to write, I guess even the trilogy series and in particular this particular book, The War Within Me.
Well, I've always loved reading historical fiction, but I hadn't written like my other novels before this trilogy were contemporary, more or less contemporary books. You know, sometimes set a little bit in the past, but not 500 years ago. And then what happened was when I was young, I traveled in France because I've always been really big on the French language. I did it at school. I love it. Like a lot of people, I'm a bit of a Francophile. Okay. And so I saved up my pennies. I was not from a family that went traveling, but I did it when I was 18. And I happened on the amazing chateaus in the Loire Valley and was just blown away with thinking not only who lived in these places but also who didn't live in them. You know, what a divide in life to have this incredible luxury and extreme poverty as well. In particularly the 16th century was always fascinating to me. So then fast forward and years later, I'm reading a book by Marguerite because she was a writer as well as a queen. And so this is her book, The Heptameron, which is kind of bawdy tales and morality tales about the relationships between men and women. So it's really a kind of Me Too book 500 years before the time. Okay. And I then started to read about her life, and I just thought her life is like the story in a novel. So I made a fiction about her. Okay.
Yeah.
That was kind of my pandemic project. You know, people got stuck into doing things when you're at home anyway, and particularly because they lived through a lot of plague, of course,
Yeah.
and so there were parallels not only with the gender relations things, but the whole social shutting down and the way the rich fled to their other homes and
Yeah.
the poor just basically suffered.
Oh, but
So that fed the first book, and then I discovered that. See, Marguerite wanted to be a reformer. She wanted to see the worst aspects of the Catholic Church of the day changed,
yeah.
but her brother was the king, so she couldn't do much because that was the religion. Her daughter, however, thought, I'm going to outdo my mother and I'm going to reform and change and basically turn everyone Protestant, though they weren't yet using that word
Yeah.
in France. So the daughter is a really rebarbative sort of figure. For me, she's almost an anti-heroine. I really admire her dedication and her single-mindedness, but she's quite a hard person to inhabit. And for me, that was one of the interesting challenges of writing her story, how you can take someone who's not entirely likable and say, how did she turn from someone who in her youth, it was said of her that she preferred a dance to a sermon, who then turns into this leader of the Huguenots during the wars of religion and becomes a fanatic. And it's actually also a love story. And that's the other thing that got me about it, you know, Joanna, because as everyone knows, in those days, most noble or royal marriages were not made for love. They were
Mm.
made for gain, for
Yes.
strategic reasons, and for dynasties.
Yes.
And so you just occasionally find one that is a love match,
Yeah.
and this one goes tragically wrong. So there's that aspect too. It just seemed to me that her life was like a novel. And so there is a lot of, you know, made up stuff in there too. That's
Yeah.
how historical fiction works. But
Yes.
I just thought they were such fascinating, compelling women, both of them. And the third one's yet to come. So she's another compelling woman. And they were all queens of the same small country, as well as
Yeah.
being French. So
Yeah.
that's kind of what led to the two things: the long ago visit to these places in France and having imagination stirred by the architecture and the setting, and then reading a work by somebody who came from those palaces. Yeah.
Yeah. And super interesting to connect the journey of the trilogy. It's good to know we, don't necessarily have to read the first one, but
That's
If
right.
we're watching, if we're curious, because there will be people watching
Mhm.
all around the world, how do we connect with you, Tracy? Where's the best? Where do we find a bit more about you? I can certainly put a link into the publisher, but tell us a bit about the best way to connect.
Okay, well, the publisher would be the first port of call because all the information about the books is there. But I share a blog with my partner John Kinsella where we, write about everything really. It's all kinds of topics, and I also just in recent months have started a YouTube channel which is called Language Learning Live. It's connected to my love of learning languages and French, but also other languages, and to literature as well. So there's literary things on there also. And so that's at Lang Learn Life, and it's pretty easy to find if anyone wants to check out that channel.
Yeah, look, I'll put it in the show notes to make it really easy.
Thank you.
And anyone who's a seasoned Yellow Shelf watcher will know that I've interviewed John Kinsella as well. So
Yes.
I'll put a link into his interview if anyone's curious. Tracy, tell us about your book, the third trilogy book. When
Yes.
is that next year? When's that?
That's still in process. And, that's a very different journey because the first two books are looking at the strong women characters who fought for reform in the Catholic Church, so who were working toward Protestantism, which kind of failed in France
Yeah.
after terrible battles. The third one is someone who's on the Catholic side, and that's the person known to history as Queen Margot. There's been a lot written about her, a lot that's scandalous. She's been portrayed as a nymphomaniac and a crazed woman. So you can imagine there's probably not
Yeah.
much historical truth to that, but that makes good movies.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but she was also very intellectual and considered very beautiful. So she's this kind of tense tension figure between the two images that will be very interesting to explore, and just to show the other side a bit of the wars of religion or civil wars in France as well.
Yeah. Well, Tracy, sounds intriguing. So I'd love you to come back next year or when the book's ready and we can
Thank
check
you.
in again.
Be happy
I,
to.
in the meantime, enjoy the journey of the war within me. Congratulations and thank you for joining us at Yellow Shelf.
Thanks again.
Cheers.